Our speakers, and I'm going to introduce the first panelist myself. Mr. K. Desikan, sir, is IAS, Additional Chief Secretary, Industries Department, Government of Tamil Nadu. Sir, can I have you on stage? We also have Mr. Khurshid Ahmed Najmi, former legal advisor, RBI India. Also joining them on stage, Mr. Sharif Kotapurat, Managing Partner, Mount Judy Ventures LLP, India. And also, our fourth panelist, Dr. Rahmatullah Abdul Ahad, Managing Director, Jan Seva Cooperative Credit Society Limited, India. All these exceptional panelists require an exceptional moderator, an academics, and before his work with Harvard Law School, he spent a decade in the Indian finance industry. He launched India's first Sharia index with the Bombay Stock Exchange, the first mutual fund scheme, and the first venture capital scheme approved by SEBI. He also established India's first Center for Alternative Finance at the ITM Business School. And for his contribution to the Indian finance industry, he has received the Scotch Digital Inclusion Award 2011 and is the recipient of the Honorary Award from Islamic Finance Forum of South Asia, Colombo. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our moderator, Professor, Rizvi Institute of Management Studies and Research, Professor Dr. Shariq Nisar from Mumbai, India. Big round of applause for all the panelists and our moderator, please.
Hello. Am I audible? Okay. We are almost, I think, 25 minutes running behind schedule. So without taking much time, what we have decided is 8 to 10 minutes each speaker will speak about the area that he is asked to speak on. And after that, we will also try to have, give time to the question answers, for the question answers to the audience. So that is what the session is about. This is the first session, full session on India. We have been discussing Islamic finance from the various perspectives, legal, regulatory, Sharia, business, etc., etc. We have had a very good flight from various countries. Now time to land to India. The real issues will be discussed here with respect to all kinds of Islamic financial activities. I have just one slide to set the tone and set also the landscape, because since morning there has been some observation that session on India should have been in the beginning to make people aware who are, especially our guests, about what is happening already, so that they could have made observations and share their experience in the light of those developments. We have just one slide, if you can have it there. Okay. Also, while it is getting ready, I take the opportunity of thanking our host, World Islamic Economic Forum, and their team who are here in India and managing all the things through their staff, through their supporting team, and it's a great service they are doing. It's only one slide. This slide, I'll be managing time very, very punctually. So I will not take more than 2-3 minutes to talk about the whole journey of Islamic finance in India since 1920s till 2020. That's the journey. If you look at the leftmost column, the mainstream finance players, what they have done, and then the community, what it has done. The activities has been categorized into academic activities, not-for-profit, and for-profit. And the whole development of Islamic finance over the year. There are many products, as mentioned by Mr. Abdul Raqib Sahab. There are areas which are open, there are areas which are not open. The community has its own challenges, Indian regulators have their own challenge, and also the business community. There are many things which are different in India, and therefore, Islamic banking has not penetrated, as many of my friends from other countries have mentioned about. The one example is like Tawarruk-like banking. So nobody will take pride in having a banking Tawarruk-like product and feeling that Islamic banking target is achieved. That is not there. So what is happening really on the ground is they're going to the spirit of the Sharia compliance, developing products within the regulatory system, which is really sharing of risk and reward in spirit, that is the most difficult task. If you look at moral hazard, agency problem, other issues are there. That is where the real issue behind Sharia compliance practices emerge. As, so we have a list of product. I will have to cut myself also short to be able to give time to all of the panelists. The most recent, what is happening in India is we have fund management, we have a venture capital fund, we have takaful also, micro takaful going on. We have 4 panelists coming from very diverse background. One, we have a senior IS officer who will talk first about the investment opportunities in the state of Tamil Nadu. We'll have his presentation first. After that, we will have a presentation by Mr. Khurshid Ahmed Najmi. He is a trained lawyer, is finance practitioner, and has been struggling with Sharia and Sharia compliance financial options for almost 12, 13 years. So a person, someone who has been struggling on all fronts as far as application of Sharia in financial sector is concerned. After that, we have Mr. Sharif Kotapurat. He is an IT professional who has made his name in the IT industry. After that, he became active in Islamic finance. He started with Rahbar, which is a crowdfunding platform with lots of investors and businesses getting connected. And now he is heading Mount Judy. So we will have. Okay. So Mr. Sharif Kotapurat will share his experience of working with Rahbar and also the challenges that he faced there. And after that, he will also talk about his most recent initiative, that is Mount Judy Ventures, which is a Sharia-compliant venture capital fund with approval from SEBI. We have one of the very old finance practitioners and teachers amongst us, Dr. Rahmatullah. Since 80s, he has been actively practicing and teaching finance and practicing Islamic finance both. He had his experience with All India Council of Muslim Economic Upliftment in Mumbai. After that, he started Multi-State Cooperative Credit Society, Jan Seva. Jan Seva is a multi-state cooperative society because until Reserve Bank of India gives license finally to an Islamic banking concept, microfinance society or cooperative society is the only route, legally permissible route through which Islamic finance can be practiced in India. So people can save their money to the society and they can also get finance through the same society. And he has been using various kinds of Islamic finance products like Muzaraba, Murabha, mainly Murabha and other things. So he will also share his thoughts. So with these few observations, may I now invite Chief Secretary to kindly come and share his thoughts. Sir, please, can you?
Distinguished delegates, good evening to all of you. I'll be making a brief presentation on the strengths of Tamil Nadu. I'll be showcasing Tamil Nadu and its present economic strengths. And I will also be presenting this presentation on the investment opportunities in Tamil Nadu. Tamil Nadu is the second largest economy in this country. Even though in terms of population and geographical area, we are in much higher ranks, we are the second largest economy in the country. This is a fact to be reckoned with in terms of business opportunities as well as investment opportunities. If you see in terms of number of parameters, Tamil Nadu is first or second or third in most of the parameters. If you take the number of factories in the country, Tamil Nadu is number first in terms of the number of factories in the country. Number of workers employed in organized sector, again we are number one. In terms of gross industrial output, we are number third in the country. In terms of net value addition, we are number third. And I also would like to inform you about some major findings, like National Council for Applied Economic Research have recently given a report on the investment potential ranking of various states in the country. There again, we are number 2 in the country. If you see an international consultants report of Frost and Sullivan, in terms of overall economic development potential, again Tamil Nadu ranks number 2. Recently, in terms of quality of governance and various other parameters, there's a top research institute called Public Affairs Center in Bangalore, and they have ranked Tamil Nadu as number 2 in the country. If you take FDI inflows, right from April 2000 to 2018, we are 4th in actual FDI inflows with the 27 billion US dollars. In 2011 to 2016 alone, we have done more than 18 billion US dollars. Tamil Nadu is the most urbanized state in the country. In terms of overall exports, again we are number 3. If you see the number of operational special economic zones and export-oriented units, again we are number 1 in the country. It only gives a clear indication that Tamil Nadu is a very competitive economy. Only in a competitive economy, it can excel in exports. The fact that we have the highest number of operational EOUs and we are doing well in exports, we are able to attract FDIs, shows that Tamil Nadu is a very competitive economy. Now, if you see in terms of skilled manpower, we are second to none. Whether be it the number of engineering colleges or polytechnics or ITIs, or in terms of the graduates who are coming out of the portals of educational institutions, we have a very, very big talented pool of manpower which is supplying for the entire globe. In terms of renewable energy capacity, Tamil Nadu is number 1 in the country. If you take wind, we are as big as California in terms of our capacity addition. We have more than 8,000 megawatts of wind energy in Tamil Nadu. In solar, in last few years alone, we have added 2,000 megawatts of capacity. Therefore, in terms of renewable energy, Tamil Nadu is a force to reckon with. Again, if you take the arrival of foreign and domestic tourists, just to give an indication of the tourism potential, we are number 1 in the country for the last few years. The advantage Tamil Nadu, if you see, in terms of purchasing power parity, we are number 32 in the world. We are bigger than Vietnam, Belgium, Sweden, Norway, Finland, Denmark, New Zealand. In terms of growth rates, GSDP growth rates, consistently we have been doing well. 78% we have been doing, many a time more than the national average. Next, please, we can go to the next slide. I think I already mentioned to you, exports we have been doing well. More than that, Tamil Nadu is a very mature industrial economy. It's not a flash in the pan. We have been traditionally very strong in textiles, engineering, leather. In the last 20 years, we have become a major global hub in automobiles and auto components. And not only that, in IT, next to Bangalore, we are the second biggest export hub for software, services, and IT applications. Next, please. I already mentioned about the operational EOUs. This is, I already mentioned to you that in the Frost and Sullivan Index of Economic Development Index, we are number 2 next to Maharashtra. Next is this state, that the investment potential index. Again, we are number 2. We have moved up from 6 to 2, from 17 to 18. Public affairs index, already I have mentioned. It is several parameters, not only quality of governance, law and order, uninterrupted power supply, skilled manpower, etc. Now, please go to the next slide. Another unknown fact, in terms of Fortune 500 companies, more than 60 Fortune 500 companies are in Tamil Nadu. Whether it is Ford, Dell, Flextronics, or Nissan, Daimler, BMW, I can go on and, the number is such a huge number, and more than 60 such companies are located in Tamil Nadu. You will be happy to note that there are more than 3,000 foreign companies operating in Tamil Nadu. When I say 3,000 foreign companies, they are all manufacturing companies. I'm not talking about trading companies or some representative offices. There are more than 350 Korean companies which are operating. More than 500 Japanese companies are operating. More than 350 US companies are operating. Please go to the next. The Six Sigma advantages of Tamil Nadu: a mature, diversified industrial base, excellent port and airport connectivity. Tamil Nadu, Chennai may be the only city in the India which has 3 ports: Chennai, Ennur Kamarajar Port and Kattupalli Port. Similarly, in terms of cost competitiveness, we are actually better than China. Today, in terms of cost, labor cost, Tamil Nadu is better than China. And I already mentioned to you about the skilled manpower which is coming out of the state. Therefore, we have all the competitive strengths to be a leading player in manufacturing and infrastructure. These are the 12 focus sectors we identified for our state: textiles, pharmaceuticals, agro and food processing, aerospace and defense. Since we have become a major player in automobiles, our next place in the growth trajectory is aerospace. We have created a aerospace and defense park near Chennai, where we would like aerospace companies to, especially the tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers to OEMs, to locate their plants. Renewable energy, infrastructure, chemicals and pharmaceuticals, IT and IT-enabled services, heavy engineering and electronics and hardware. And unlike automobiles and auto components, Tamil Nadu has created an electronics hardware ecosystem in and around Chennai. The world's largest contract manufacturer, Foxconn, is based in Chennai. Similarly, Dell, Flextronics, and I can tell number of such companies. But today we have a big electronics hardware ecosystem in our state. Automobiles, already I mentioned to you, today we are able to produce 1.6 million cars a year. We are almost producing 3 cars a minute, and all the global top players are here. Starting with Ford, Hyundai, Daimler, BMW, Nissan, and PSA Francis also will be setting up their car factory in Tamil Nadu. Please, next. On electronics hardware, again, I have already mentioned to you. Next, please. We have all the top companies in Tamil Nadu. And again, in IT sector, more than 600,000 IT professionals are working in Chennai, and we are able to export around $17 to $18 billion of software exports. Okay, now coming to our government, what we offer. We offer land for manufacturing companies for locating their plants in our industrial parks. We provide single window facilitation online through Tamil Nadu Industrial Guidance Bureau. We have a new act called Business Facilitation Act, where we are offering single window clearances within 30 days in a transparent and time-bound manner. We also have provision for deemed clearances. The last but not the least, Tamil Nadu government also offers a structured package of incentives for large investors whose investment is above $70 million US. And all big investors, international and domestic, have availed of this structured package of incentives, which includes tax-based incentives like GST-based incentives. Earlier it was VAT and GST. This just gives you an information about land availability. We have also private industrial parks which have been funded by Japanese and Singapore companies like this Asanda's One Hub Chennai, or the Sumitomo Mahindra Industrial Park near Gummidipundi, or Sojitz Motherson Japanese Industrial Park near Kanchipuram. SIPCOT, State Industries Promotion Corporation of Tamil Nadu, has its own industrial parks. Next, please. The incentive package I already have mentioned. Next, please. This is a single window online portal, www.ecbusiness.tn.gov.in, where I would request investors to make their applications for single composite clearances concerning several agencies. Again, last but not the least, I would like to invite all of you to participate in the Global Investors Meet, which Government of Tamil Nadu is hosting on 23rd and 24th of January 2019. And it's a great opportunity for business networking and signing MOUs with Government of Tamil Nadu. Any investment about 10 crores, we are willing to look at it. Small scale industries, there is no investment limit, no threshold limit. They can also come with their investments. Therefore, I would once again request all of you to participate in our Global Investors Meet on 23rd and 24th of January 2019. Thank you very much.
go. If there is a question, I can take 2 questions if there is any, because I think this subject has also been discussed in the morning session. But still, if there are questions, I can take it up. Otherwise, we'll allow him to go. Okay? No, sir. Thank you. Okay, so we'll come to Islamic finance business again. Now, Khurshid Najmi Saab, we have amongst us, and as I said, he has been struggling with Islamic finance applications. In his experience includes development of Islamic banking regulation in Bangladesh, and he has also been part of many backdoor discussions which are mentioned in the morning, like ICD's effort to develop an Islamic finance NBFC in India, and many more. He has also been part of a couple of Islamic finance transactions. So we'll start with Mr. Najmi about his presentation, and after that we'll move to next. So Najmi sir.
Assalamu alaikum. In this session, we will be talking about legal framework for carrying out financial activities in India. Primarily, I will be talking about Foreign Exchange Management Act, which deals with the investment in the form of equity or otherwise in India. In addition to that, I'll just make a passing reference of the various other statutes that are involved for an activity to be carried out pertaining to investments. Now, some of the statutes that get attracted are, of course, Companies Act, Securities and Exchange Board, Securities and Exchange Board of India Act, which is also a regulator of the equity segment, and of course, Indian Contract Act, the Transfer Property Act, the Indian Trust Act, the Stamp Act. The Stamp Act is extremely important because in especially sale and leaseback transactions, is a Stamp Act that has a major role to play. Fortunately here, the state government has the authority to either allow or remit the stamp. Since we are talking about the Tamil Nadu, and Tamil Nadu seems to be very interested in ensuring that Sharia compliant investment takes place here, hopefully the Tamil Nadu government will allow remission of stamps even in the sale and leaseback transactions, which would go a long way to facilitate sukuk transactions of which we were talking about. The other statute that would get attracted is the Central Act, like Income Tax Act, and presently GST. Even GST may have some role to play when we talk about the lease financing. But majorly, the act that is relevant to see general investments from outside India to any commercial activity in India is Foreign Exchange Management Act, and therefore it is important to discuss that. Now, according to Foreign Exchange Investment Act, an investment made by a person resident outside India on a repatriable basis is a foreign investment. It can be, fund can be invested in India in the form of a WS, wholly owned subsidiary. So all foreign companies are allowed to establish a wholly owned subsidiaries here in India and carry on the activity that they want to. Or they can get in touch with some local entity here and create a joint venture. So this vehicle can be used for the purpose of equity investments. And there is a Reserve Bank of India Act, also the regulation that facilitates investments dealing with equity. Then the other type of investment would be non-equity investments, where the sukuk will come into play. There are rules and regulations that would come in the way of issuing general sukuk, which we will also cover here. Now, Foreign exchange allows investment in an automatic route. And under the automatic route, no permissions are required from any authority in India. Anybody proposing to make investment can come to India, establish a WAS or a joint venture, or enter into an agreement for investment with an Indian entity, direct investment with an Indian entity. The Indian entity has to approach the bank here. Bank have been delegated all the powers to consider such a request and allow the request. Of course, there are conditionalities pertaining to sectoral cap, minimum maturity period, and end use. Other than this, there's approval route. If the limits exceed, say, more than 500 million, then you have to go to the government for seeking approval through Reserve Bank of India. Good thing is that in most of the major areas where India needs investment and where the foreigners would be interested in making investments come under the automatic route. So manufacturing sector is 100% permissible investment by any foreign entity who wants to establish a company or a joint venture here. Similarly, construction development activity, which would include township construction of residential, commercial premises, roads or bridges, hotels, resorts, hospitals, educational institutions, recreational facilities, city and regional level infrastructure townships. They are all 100% automatic route. Another area that needs huge investment in India, and the government of India is also trying, to see that funds flow in this area, is relating to railway infrastructure operations, which covers suburban corridor projects, high-speed train projects, dedicated freight lines, rolling stocks, including train sets and locomotives, coaches, freight terminals, passenger terminals, infrastructure in industrial park pertaining to railway lines, etc. Pharmaceutical industry is another area where 100% foreign investment is permissible in greenfield projects. In brownfield, it is 100% permissible, but up to 74% it is automatic. Beyond that, one would require approval from the government. Airports, ports, regional air transport services, most of these are under 100% foreign investments permissibility. Banking in private sector, investment can be made up to 74%. Non-banking finance companies, 100% foreign investments are allowed. So you can see that in most of the areas, the general open permission is available for any foreign investor to come to India and make investments. There are, of course, conditionalities, like all investments should be through inward remittances. For the investment made in India, in equity, transfer of capital instruments are also permitted. Then remittance of sale proceeds are also permitted in the currency in which the money was invested. There are conditionalities attached for eligible borrowers who can take fund from outside India, and the fund can come in the form of a buyer's credit, supplier's credit, financial credit, or in the form of bonds or sukuk. Minimum average maturity are slowly being done away with. Presently, the minimum average maturity for infrastructure sector has been put only as 5 years. In some of the manufacturing sector, the minimum average maturity has been brought to 1 year. Permitted end use is all capital investments. All-in cost ceiling, for the purpose of Sukuk, this is relevant. All-in cost ceiling is labor plus 3.5%. So far as recognized lenders are concerned, all international banks, international capital markets, multilateral financial institutions, export credit agencies, suppliers of equipment, foreign equity holders can also participate in Sukuk. Overseas long-term investors, such as potential regulated financial entities, pension funds, insurance companies, sovereign wealth funds, they can all come and invest through Sukuk. For those who are making investments in Sukuk, of course, Sukuk can be either security-based, secured Sukuk, or asset-based Sukuk, or asset-backed Sukuk. So both the type of Sukuks can be issued in India. The only issue in relating to asset-backed Sukuk is, of course, sale cum lease, and that would require permission or remission of a stamp duty from the government of Tamil Nadu. In the normal case of funding, FEMA allows secured funding, and issuer is permitted to create charge on immovable assets by way of mortgage, charge on movable assets by way of pledge hypothecation, charge on financial securities like pledge of promoters' shares in favor of foreign investors, issue of corporate and or personal guarantees. Of course, personal guarantees may not be permissible under Sukuk. Conversion of ECB, external commercial borrowing in the form of Sukuk, can be converted into equity. That is also permissible. An authorized dealer, that is a bank through which the fund has come to India, may allow the remittance of sale proceeds of security to the seller of the shares or resident outside India, provided that the security was held by the seller on repatriation basis. The guiding principle is that the person resident outside India is not guaranteed any assured return in the form if the investment had come in the form of equity. Two minor contracts statutes which are relevant is law of contract. I would like to mention that certain provisions of law of contract and also law of Transfer of Property Act is at slightly different from the other common law countries. So far as India is concerned, here the Contract Act was based not only on the common law, but also on the customs and rules that were prevalent before the Britishers came into India. And by and large in India, the Muslim muamalat were already in place. And therefore, the Contract Act has been so widely worded that it can be structured the way the investors would like it to be structured. In one of the cases, the question was, a loan was given, but the condition of the loan was that the fund provider would share the profit. The question arose whether the fund provider should, instead of getting interest, claim profit. The courts in India took the view that such a contract is also a valid contract. So I think by and large I have covered various statutes that would get attracted in undertaking a commercial activity in India. So far as equity investments are concerned, there are no issues. We have Trust Act in place, we have the Lease Acts in place, and therefore the only issue that can possibly arise in Sukuk is in relation to a Stamp Act, and Stamp Act is a matter of a state. So hopefully the Tamil Nadu government will allow revision remission of stamps, and Sukuk could take place in India. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Najmi Saab. This was from the side of investors who want to come to India, and they want to choose the right vehicle through which they can invest in Indian economy in Sharia compliant manner. So that was on the investment side. As I promised, I would like this session to be very interactive, and that is where I'm pushing myself also and also the panelists to remain short and crisp on their presentation, because details can always be asked by the person concerned during the breaks. I also encourage you all to kindly note down your questions. Please be ready, because within next 15 to 20 minutes, we shall be back to you to address your queries and concerns that you may have with regard to India. So please be ready, and I want this session to be interactive. Now, we will very quickly move on to Mr. Sharif Kotapurat. He is the practical side of Islamic finance in India. So while Mr. Najmi was speaking about investors looking at Indian economy in a Sharia compliant manner investment, this is the community perspective that is brought in by Mr. Sharif, and also the challenges that he has faced in really merging or converging the risk and return, and what are the challenges that he has faced. So over to you, Sharif Bhai. Please remember, within 10 minutes we have to finish. Okay? Thank you very much.
Jazakallah khairan for the introduction. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Can I have the slides up? So I'm going to actually speak on behalf of two organizations. One is Raiber Financial Consultants, and the other is Mount Judy Ventures. And the reason I'm clubbing these two together, because this is part of a journey. And it's a long journey, and we have just started taking the first and the basic baby steps. Like many of the people who came from abroad mentioned, we can provide Islamic financing within the current Indian legal structures itself. And that's what Mr. Najmi also just reiterated. The question is, what structures make sense? What structures are tax efficient? And how can we do it in such a way that this is really seen by all parties as a true alternative to interest-based financing? So this thought has been there for a long time, that something needs to be done in the Islamic finance area. There has to be an avenue where people can put their money and get halal earnings, as well as people who need money should have a place where they can go to and get money, either in terms of debt, for either the capital requirement or working capital requirement, or as equity. Alhamdulillah, being in Bangalore and being a place which is energetic with a lot of young, educated and people who have got a lot of experience, and Chennai is no different. I'm not putting down Chennai when I mentioned this, but it's just that my journey started from Bangalore. So all the right ingredients were already present. So first and foremost, there were a set of young people who were motivated by the principles of Islamic finance. And second, they had a dream and a passion that we have to show that this can be done in India, and we have to make it a success and prove that it can be done in India. They all have come from a professional background with strong grounding in ethics. They all applied their mind to come up with innovative structures which make things tax efficient, which makes things legally compliant in India, which makes it Sharia compliant. And we realized that the Indian economy is a huge growing economy, and this is the right time to be in this in financing in India. And we also had a larger vision for community development and societal progress, And here, I don't just mean the Muslim community, it's the, everyone living around us. And the team that we, alhamdulillah, got were people who were working in companies like Deloitte and PwC, people who have left their very high-paying IT jobs, they left their consulting jobs, and they have come for 25 to 30% of the salary that they were drawing before, because they felt that this is the minimum sacrifice that we can do for the sake of this, sake of Islamic finance in India. We have had people just graduating from IIM saying, you please take me, I want to work in this even if I'm working for free. We have people we have a person who is joining us just next month who is resigned from CRISIL, which is one of the very well-known rating agency in India, and is joining us in December. And again, by taking a haircut, by taking taking a 50% loss in salary. So all these ingredients, and as I said, this journey started about 5-6 years ago. We started with the Lifeline Foundation, which serves the real poor, the people who are below poverty line. We use the Grameen Bank model and set up groups where micro-lending is happening. Then it's a purely bottoms-up approach, like Mr. Antonio was telling in the previous session. Then we graduated to Lead Trust, where we supported the education of students from their 10th standard onwards. And then we moved to Rehbar, which started providing finance for small and medium enterprise. And I'll get into more details of that, and the next step of that is Mount Judy. The mission of Rehbar Financial Consultants was very straightforward. It is to enhance the value creation for businesses and investors while bringing them together. Even though Mr. Antonio again talked about disintermediation, there are certain places where you cannot do disintermediation. Because when a business comes and asks for money, there has to be some people who are capable enough who can evaluate that business, who can then study whether this business can give the right cash flow, whether the business projections that they have given are correct. Can we look at their past history and verify that they're telling the truth? Can we do a due diligence, talk to his suppliers, talk to his customers, talk to his employees, and see whether the person is ethical and whether he is cutting corners, is he cheating on taxes, is he doing X, Y, Z? Because those are indicators of whether he'll be truthful to us also. And after doing all this due diligence, then Rehbar basically decides that this is a business that can be invested into and takes the investor's money and gives it in one of the two forms. So the two forms that we have currently identified, actually three, if you can, there's a slight variation on one. The first is very straightforward. It is operating lease. And the one other guideline that we had when we set up Rehbar was that not only should it be Sharia compliant by fatwa, but it should be perceived as Sharia compliant by all people involved. So we didn't want to structure a lease which is a pure murabaha, where you increase the price and the person has to give you a certain amount every month. In an operating lease that Rehbar does for a company, if we buy an equipment, we pay the money, the payments don't start from the business. The business starts paying only when the machine is installed and operational. If beyond the circumstances, if circumstances beyond the control of the person who has taken the equipment causes the equipment to fail, then we don't take rental for the period in which the machine is not used. So this is absolute risk sharing, even in, it's a pure operating leasing model. It is not a way to short circuit and just change the wordings, as I think it was Abdur Rakib Sahib who mentioned. So that skepticism of people that this is just interest in a different, in a different bottle, that skepticism has been removed by doing this. And this is what we believe that we should be doing. So we act as an intermediary, as I mentioned. And so far, it's been able to create an enhanced value for 75 businesses, over 50 billion INR crores, 50 crore Indian rupees, which is roughly about 7 to 8 million US dollars. And we use a special purpose vehicle where multiple of these investments are pooled together. So the risk of the investments are shared by all investors or a large group of investors. So it's like a mutual fund for Sukuk. where you club together various things and then it is invested. That's, it's worked out, alhamdulillah, very well. The return on investment from the SPV has been about 15%, though the return to investors has been slightly less because some money is sitting idle in the SPV. The next step, after having done this, then we said that there has to be something for people who need pure equity funding. And for that, we created Mount Judy Ventures, which is today, alhamdulillah, a SEBI-approved venture capital fund. So we have gone through all the regulatory processes. We have done all the regulatory requirements. We have got the approval from SEBI, and we are right now raising funds for Mount Judy Venture. And what differentiates Mount Judy Venture, this VC fund, from other VC funds are, 3-4 different things. One is an extremely, an experienced set of partners, advisors, and mentors, which is mostly from people who have built successful industries. So it's not a set of number crunchers who sit and then look at, the returns and then purely look at the money part, but it's people who can sit with the company that we have invested in, guide them, help them, and then grow them to a stage from where we can exit and make money for the investors and make money for the business that we have invested in. We're planning to use a balanced portfolio allocation because it's the first fund that we're doing, where about 30% of the portfolio will be used, the operating lease and that just reminded me that I forgot to mention the 2 other models that we are doing. The second model that we do is a project financing, where a particular person has a project for a year or a year and a half. So we give him financing for doing the project till the payment comes at the end, and a certain percentage of the profit comes back from that project financing. And the third is working capital, where there is again a Murabaha model, where the profit is shared in a particular ratio between the investors and the person who's doing the business. So having finished Rehabur, come back to Mount Judy. So we do a balanced portfolio allocation where 30% goes into the Rehabur kind of investments, mostly into operating leases, and 70% will go into equity. And we're looking at new age businesses where we want to invest, where there is some leverage of technology, a disruptive business model, and a social purpose. So these are the 3 criteria we use. To give you a few examples, we're looking at a large biofuel plant which converts rice straw to pellets which can replace coal. So it helps, if those of you who have traveled to Delhi in the last few weeks would know about the fog and the pollution which is coming from farmers burning rice straw. And this basically prevents that, because that rice straw is no longer burnt, it is actually converted into pellets and then given. Another one is vegetables which are with a sort of an semi-organic vegetable farming and supply to the end customers. We're looking at affordable housing as a third investment opportunity. So similarly, we are finding a lot of opportunities in India, and any of these models, if it succeeds, it has the opportunity to scale because the large size of Indian population and the geography. And these are as I said, these are baby steps. And we have a much, much larger vision. And obviously, we are not going to be able to do it by ourselves. We need more people to come together so that we can do these things. We are looking at home financing. We are looking at project financing, SME financing, philanthropic, this thing, endowments, Waqf development. All these are part of what we want to do in the future, but we will take one step at a time. We will, bite what we can chew and swallow, and then grow forward. And just one thing in the passing I wanted to mention, housing finance, we talked about the double stamp duty. There are ways of avoiding the double stamp duty which can be done, but in India we have another bigger problem, because the interest on house finance can be claimed as a tax exemption, and there is no way we can compensate for that. So because of which the house financing in a Sharia compliant fashion becomes much more difficult. We are still looking at how we can work around things, and we are putting our energies into trying to solve this problem, and inshallah maybe we will come up with some solution soon. Thank you all for your time, and I'm open for questions later.
Thank you very much, Sharif Bhai. Thank you very much for summing up your each year of experience in 1 minute. That's really appreciated. Sharif Bhai comes from technology background, so he has...
I think they can recognize by the fact that I'm the only one not wearing a suit.
That's one. Also, he has mentioned Murabha because Indians know Murabha very well, but what he meant really was Ijara and Mudarba. So normally, Indian finance players, especially Muslim finance professionals, have been avoiding even Murabha to the extent possible. And whenever Murabha has happened, it is real Murabha that has been practiced. I remember in 1980s, a Murabha deal came to highlight where an Islamic bank from Middle East has financed Amitabh Bachchan Corporation Private Limited, ABCL, as a Murabha transaction for filmmaking. So that was the Murabha we have in mind sometime, because the matter was highlighted, for it went to the court for liquidation. So Murabha and Tawarruk is not actually practiced in India. Whatever is happening in the real sense, real transaction, real risk sharing, and real business support, whether it is microfinance or it is SME finance. With this, I'll move on to my final speaker, Dr. Rahmatullah Saab. He has been teacher of economics and practicing, microfinance for many years. And last couple of years, he has been a very hectic life in the sense that at the fag end of his career, not life, I would say, he decided to launch a multi-state cooperative credit society, and then he is operating from 30 locations in India through a very prominent Islamic microfinance cooperative society in India, which is known as Jan Seva. He is the founder of Jan Seva, and now Dr. Rahmatullah Saab, over to you to share your experience. May I request that please 10-minute time is considered. Thank you very much.
Assalamu alaikum. Nahmaduhu Rasulihil Kareem, amma baad. Let me first thank to the organizers of this roundtable conference who have given the opportunity to share one of the successful model or experience in the Islamic finance in India. We had been talking about the Islamic finance, though I hardly listened from anyone who talked about zakat. Islamic finance does not simply means, as per my understanding, only banking. Banking, insurance, awqaf was there, but none talked about it. Perhaps because this roundtable conference does not conceive it to be part of it. But when we talk about it, I think we need to take care of that. Second important thing that I would like to say, that we had been in this business since 1984 in a small way in Mumbai, Bombay, which is for one particular ward or thereafter the whole Bombay. That society was registered in the Maharashtra Cooperative Societies Act 1965, and it has the limitation of just collecting fund and giving it to the people as loan, that too on service charge basis. Whereas we observe that the society must address three basic problems of the Muslim community in particular. One is that they want to get rid of interest. Get rid of interest. The second, they want to meet their financial needs for general or business purpose. And the third, the investors who want, those who have got the surplus with them, they want to earn something as a profit, halal profit. So we had been looking for the option, either go for the company or go as a nidhi or other options. Meanwhile, we got this Jan Seva Cooperative, Multi-State Cooperative Societies Act, which we registered in 2010. And Alhamdulillah, from there onward, we made the journey. And we feel that as on today, in the cooperative sector, it is one of the, I say with the little reservation, otherwise I should say, the largest cooperative Islamic finance institution in the cooperative sector in India. This is next to none. So we got this registration. This is from the Ministry of Agriculture, Department of Cooperation, under the MSCS Act 2002. This is the regulatory authority. Thereafter, of course, the Board of Directors, the Act policy and BOD's policy, Act rule and BOD policy are the three regulatory regulations that are being taken care of. Now, vision and mission, simple, that I just talked about, that we want to liberate people from this interest, which is not only haram, but it is very exploitative, and therefore the vision is to address to the Indian community, not Muslims alone, but the Indian community at the beginning, and thereafter, of course, the at the global level. Now, to achieve this, we had decided to establish branches at different places, because cooperative is a movement which is more successful when it is localized or it has got a local base. And we adopted that, and alhamdulillah, that policy gave us success. And as on today, we are working in 9 states of India. I will let you know at a later stage. The details are there on the PPT, and you will have just a look at, and then you will come to know. Now, these are the 12 states of India, the colored one, where we have the permission to operate, license to operate. These are the 12 states. Now, the most important problem is that people ask that what are your financial products? I mean, how do you move around? So, we have modeled out inflow and outflow, how to mobilize fund and how to use the fund. So, the first slide, this slide shows 4 different sectors through which we mobilize the fund. One is general demand deposit. To avoid certain complications, we are using the word Amana Jan Seva Amana Fund, JAF, Jan Seva Amana Fund. This is nothing but the demand deposit. The only difference is that we treat, as in Islamic finance, we treat this demand deposit as loan from the depositors, loan to Jan Seva from the depositors. So, we guarantee them, we take this opportunity by doing this, that we use that fund, and we give them guarantee that irrespective of risk and cost, whatever has been deposited, it will be given back. Then the second is JMIF, Jan Seva Members Investment Fund, just like term deposit or demand deposit. Here, while taking deposit, we take say an indemnity, or we take an affidavit from the depositors that this deposit is accepted only from you only when you sign that that Jan Seva's approach for PLS system, profit loss sharing system, will be in operation, and if there is a loss, you will be the person, or the individual who will bear the loss. Jan Seva will be losing only its managerial remunerations, whatever it may be. Otherwise, the rest will be yours. However, there we guarantee that if there is a profit, then minimum 50% of the profit earned, or it may go up to 70 to 80% of the profit, subject to the availability of liquidity of the fund, will be given to you. So, our commitment to them is, if we earn profit, then minimum 50 and maximum 70 or 80% will be shared with you. Now, we have got some other systems also, which is known as SPV, or security deposit. There are some deposit system. We have come out with a system, I'll let you know, that we are granting total cost-free loan to our members. So, that you'll come to know here when we say outsiding, how we use the fund. The funds we divide into, apart from just like banking system, say around 10 to 15% of the fund we keep at of the demand deposit. Of course, we keep for liquidity, just like CRR of the banks. And say 10 to 20% we try to use it as SLR. But the rest of the funds, we use it in these three avenues. One is cost-free loan, where the system is there for repayment of the interest-based loan from the private sector. Then for education purpose, for medical purpose, we are giving cost-free, total cost-free loan to our members. And this is maximum limit is 3 lakh rupees and maximum period is 24, normally 24 months, maybe 36 months as well. Here in microfinance system, microfinance JLG base, that is joint liability group based loan we are giving. That goes up to 2 lakh rupees, but there is one small category of it is known as empowerment loan or Qarz-e Hasana loan. Qarz-e Hasana. There the person without any background or guarantee, if he wants to do some business, so for economic empowerment, we give up to 10,000 rupees to that person without any guarantee and without any charge, just based on a promissory note. So this is one category. The second category is that service charge based loan. We had previously abolished this service charge based loan, but in a passage of 1 year, we came to a conclusion that there is a pressing demand that this kind of loan should be, this should be reintroduced. The reason is that those who do not come in the other two categories, they say that we are, by doing this, you are compelling us to go to the money lenders or to the bankers. So last year, this year we introduced it, and here general purpose loan, purposes other than business and purposes other than the three, anybody who comes, we advance loan up to, say, of course, secured guarantee up to 10 lakh rupees. Now, the third is business purpose loan. For commercial activity, those who are already in business, it's not the problem, as he said, that we have to find out whether he is genuine or ingenuine. We are advancing this business purpose loan only to the businessmen who are already in the business. No startup capital. We don't have, we don't honor the startup people. Those who are in the business, they want to expand it, they want to strengthen it, then we provide loan up to 25 lakh rupees. And in extreme cases, we can give 50 lakh rupees. Khatam ho gaya time? Acha? To asal to baki hai. Okay, okay. So this is the case, the details will come inshallah. Now what I want to say is, see the growth, different kind of growth that the society has achieved. Then this is the second chart. Please have a look. This is the third chart. This is regarding the transactions and turnovers. Now, this is in view of the successful operation and model. This Islamic Finance Forum of South Asia has awarded this gold medal to the Jan Seva Cooperative Credit Society. Now, there are some say challenges. No, sorry, this is prospects. Some challenges. See all those. Back button. Acha. I think many of the challenges had been expressed previously. I would just support it by saying that the greatest roadblock to the Islamic banking or finance in India are Muslims, Muslims of India. This is unfortunate that we talk, but we don't practice. This is the time, suggestion that we, from lip service to the practice, we start. In some of the places, it was a very embarrassing question that I had asked, and people had to say to nothing. Felt sorry that those who are sitting, here few hundred, in some of the places few thousand people also there. When I simply ask them that you always, you know it. This is this is not true that they don't know that riba is haram or sood is haram. They know it. Because when they want loan, they come to us. But when they have to deposit the money, they go to the banks. So this is the kind of thing. They know it. But why is it that they do not participate in this process? I do not know what you call, but unless this attitude, this is removed, the Islamic finance will not get catch hold of the progress or the steps that is required. The second important thing that I want to say is that when, it was no chance to give you as time has passed, that give and gain. Everybody comes to gain, not to give. And second thing is that if they invest funds with us, they like that we should give 15 to 18% of return to the investment. But when Muslim businessmen come to us and we ask them, what is your offer on investment? Then they start from 8%, 9%, 10%, 20%, not more than 10% a year. Now the same person, the same community comes, want a return of 12%, and the same community comes and wants funds from Jan Seva at 8%. Now think, this is the situation and this is the challenge that we are facing. These are the challenges which are, I think, faced by many institutions, and this is in addition to the legal hurdles that had been pointed out earlier, that the government has changed the policy. Now cooperative cannot do the banking business. They have to operate within members, no outsiders.
Thank you, Dr. Saab.
And one more thing. This greediness, greed has actually created the problem, and that's why Ponzi schemes has come. The last thing is that prospects of, in spite of all these prospects of Islamic financial system in India is very, 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 very bright. In spite of all disappointments, prospects are very, very bright. At the macro level, if you go, the government of India is paying 22,000 crores every month as interest. We were talking about infrastructural finance to India. 33 lakh crore rupees are loan that government has taken. Now, if we bring fund from outside, we have the opportunity to invest here, and it will be a boon to the Indian population, including Muslims, to be free from interest-based transactions, and India as a country can get rid of it. Now, last thing, that small steps you say, we started this with 1,75,000 rupees and 700 members. But Alhamdulillah, we have reached to, you have seen the growth, that we have reached to a turnover of 300 crores approximately per annum, and cumulative turnover is around 1,000 crores in 8 years, Alhamdulillah. But now we are thinking big dreams, that we go for 110 crores share capital, 100 crores plus deposit, and turnover equivalent to 10,000 crores. So it is here that annual mutual cooperation, collaboration, and even mergers as are being seen.
I'm so sorry.
Important.
Okay,
thank you. I'm sorry for taking too much of time.
Yeah, Dr. Saab, I empathize for the audience. Whole day they have been sitting without single opportunity to ask questions. And I'm feeling for themselves that they should be given an opportunity to ask, especially in the session that addresses India's Islamic finance segment and practices. That's the reason. Otherwise, you all know, even I can talk a couple of hours on Islamic finance. I'm so passionate about it. I really appreciate Dr. Saab for, I don't like disturbing, but I appreciate you under your understanding and the understanding of other colleagues. Without further ado, I'll directly go to the questions to the audience. Please, if you have mic, please pass on. Next 14 minutes, we will have question answer. If you do not have questions, then only I will have questions. Otherwise, the floor is for the audience. Please, sir. Yes. सर आप 1 मिनट नुकसान मत कीजिए, आप बोलिए, मैं पहुंचा दूंगा इन तक. Okay, okay. Yes. हाँ, Kalra Saab, please. Kalra Saab heads PhD chamber, and he's here all the way from Delhi. Yeah. And volunteers, this side, first row here.
Everybody.
Please.
My name is Surendra Kalra.
Yeah.
I have some experience of working in Islamic finance with
Yes.
Mr. Rakib Saab and our Rahman Khan Saab and other people sitting on the dais. My question is directly to Mr. Sharif and one question to Ahmed Saab also. When you talk about operating lease, I have also an experience of getting around $80 million in India through Ijara, HSBC, Amana window. But the problem was that it had to be invested back into back-to-back lease. And in India, what we talk about, there are two types of leases: operating lease, as you said, and is finance lease. Finance lease has got an element of interest into it, which is not then permitted under Sharia laws. Operating lease is take as a rental. But the problem was that when we started investing into further back-to-back into leases, it was not profitable at all. What the terms and conditions of the lease were there with HSBC, and in India, we started giving on some rolling stock, cargo rolling stock to Titagarh and other companies on lease basis, operating lease, cargo rolling stock.
Okay.
And the second, my second question is, and then how do you, after the tenure is over, the operating lease, how do you intend, because you have just started with the operating lease transactions, then how do you take it back? At the end of the tenure, what will be the transaction, what will be the accounting, and how do you, because operating lease, you remain the owner of it, and the finance lease, you transfer the ownership. How do you take the ownership back, or you transfer the ownership to the user?
Okay, Kalra Saab.
My second question is to Ahmed Saab, doctor, that when you talk about that your liability side also you talk about that it is a loan, and the asset side also say that it is a loan. And there are small loans, saving, you call them saving, current and other things also. Whether your deposits are not covered under the credit guarantee scheme of the RBI?
Okay, okay. We will pick a couple of questions and then we'll come back. Let us allow people to ask questions. And may I request, please be specific, because if you ask long questions or share your observations at the fag end, it will come only at the cost of other people who have been waiting for the day, throughout the day, to ask questions. So please be specific. If you want to share your observation and comments, we always are going to be available here, and you can share your thoughts.
Okay.
So please, sir, please.
Yes, I'm Salahuddin Qasim Khan. I'm from Bangladesh. I'm a member of the International Advisory Panel, YEF. The question is to Mr. Rahmatullah. He made an important observation that zakat should have also been discussed in Islamic financing. I mean, if we really want to make an impact in the bottom of the pyramid, I think zakat needs to be. I want to ask him whether there is any steps to institutionalize zakat in India, because in Bangladesh it's still a private thing, and because the government is also not very effective. But the private sector has taken initiative which won an award at the Dubai Islamic Economic Award. And this is something we can share later. But how is zakat collected, and what is the framework for this important institution for poverty relief?
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much. We'll take each question, and then we'll go back to audience. So Sharif Bhai and Rahmatullah Sahab and Najmi Sahab, very quickly if you can respond to. Sharif Bhai, starting with you.
Yeah. So the question on back-to-back leases, basically what happens is that, as I mentioned, it's a pool fund into which leases are coming on a continuous basis. So it is not that we have a fixed fund which is being deployed. So we have continuously people who want to invest and earn halal money. They invest into an SPV. The modes of investment we can take offline, because I don't think the whole audience need to waste time on that. But that money keeps coming in periodic intervals. And the leases also happen as and when the lease requirement keeps coming. So when the operating lease money comes back, A certain part of it we allocate towards the principal and certain part towards the profit. The principal amount is recirculated into the pool for further lease. So that way we never have the money sitting idle. So that takes care of the loss, prevention in terms of not having that back-to-back lease. The second question was in terms of what happens to the machinery at the end of the lease period. Okay. First thing is that when we take equipment for lease, we are particular that we will not lease out highly specialized equipment. So we lease only equipment which has a market value at the end of the contract. At the end of the contract, we determine the market value, and it is up to the business whether it wants to buy it at that market value, or it wants to extend the operating lease for a few more years, or we take it back and we dispose it. So we take the responsibility of actually taking the equipment back and disposing it. We have agreements with various assessors, people who are expertise in this field. We primarily work with medical equipment, with commercial vehicles, and a few other things. The two biggest sectors that we operate in are medical equipment and commercial vehicles. And for that, this is not a problem at all.
Dr. Sir, it's a very serious question about zakat. If you want to answer in 30 seconds or less than a minute. The question about institutionalization of zakat.
I think, do you remember the year we had gone to Dhaka for IDB seminar? I presented a paper about that, the poverty, zakat as an institutionalized solution for poverty eradication. So if we have his this thing, email ID, we can send our paper.
Thank you.
But we do agree and advocate for institutionalized collection and disbursement of zakat. That is what was the key focus.
See, Islamic banking or the general conventional banking were regulated in Bangladesh for a long, long time under the same statutes. But the government of Bangladesh, with the help of the World Bank, constituted a committee to draft where they wanted a separate statute for the Islamic banking, which was in fact drafted and submitted to the government. I understand that part of the amendments suggested have been accepted by the government and has been made into law, but the whole act has not yet been accepted. And in fact, if you go to the draft which was submitted to the government, you will observe that there was a specific provision for Islamic Bank to keep a certain percentage of the income separate and keep it as zakat, and then invest in the manner the zakat is invested. Obviously, I understand that that has not happened, and therefore you say that it has not been institutionalized. Otherwise, there was full provision under the draft act to make it an institutionalized situation. Thank you.
We can go to second round of questions. Yeah, please.
No, one question is left unanswered. He was talking about deposit and loan. So in our Islamic system, there is a concept of wadiya as well. I mean, to avoid some problems with the law of the land, where is 3% or 2.5% interest is to be given to the depositor as per RBI SV say saving deposit. Kitna hai? Najmi sahab, 2.5% or 3%? Saving deposit pe? Saving per. Acha.
Okay.
Acha, anyway, so there is 5%. Now here we take it as an amana. So just to fit it into the shoes of the law, we say that this is a loan from you to the society. Whenever you want, take it back. So neither we will give anything to you, or nor you will ask anything to us. So that was the thing that.
Thank you. Will Kalra sahab, we have to pick other questions.
No, we call it demand deposit.
Whether it is covered in the credit guarantee scheme.
Beg pardon?
Credit guarantee scheme of RBI,
Yes.
it is covered under
Yes,
that.
please.
No.
We
Look, Credit Guarantee Corporation, only
that's-
those who have got the banking status,
That's separate, Dr.
they get that insurance. cooperative societies are not allowed to pay premium and take this guarantee.
DICGC is different. Yes, please. Please allow others also to ask questions. Please. Yes. Volunteers, please.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm Sirajuddin representing Alcraft Thermotechnologies. Just I would like to understand what are the products available, for compensating the working capital finance, what you are getting from the, the bank as of now. Second thing, right now, in fact, and as per the tax laws, whatever we are paying as interest, in fact, it has a tax benefit. In Islamic finance, suppose the payback, what you are paying, that is inclusive of a principal as well as a profit or interest. Will it attract a tax benefit? These are the two things I want to get clarified.
Thank you very much. I'll pick this question for the sake of time. Sharif Saab is there. He has developed a product along with his team where it is Sharia compliant. It's known as PLS, Profit and Loss Sharing Loan, PLS loan. So that is meeting with the Sharia requirement. At the same time, it is also making you eligible for tax deduction. So you can discuss this in person. Yes, other questions, I am ready to pick it up. Otherwise, we'll sum it up this. Yes, please, quickly.
My question for Mr. Sharif. I am from Bangalore. I was really hoping someone would speak about Ponzi schemes. Dr. Ponzi scheme, but there was no detailed explanation about that. I mean, in Bangalore especially, since last few months, he's already laughing there. He must be knowing what the situation is now. Many people, without getting alarmed with the Ponzi schemes, have fallen to this extortion, blatant extortion. I mean, when you stalwarts like...
We'll cover that.
We got it, okay. But I think to save embarrassment for Sharif Saab, let me take these questions. People have been playing game, and they also have been playing game. It is 3% per month. If you don't go away for 1 year, I get double, and if you go, I lose it.
No, my question is actually, when, it's so obvious, like to people who know this field, why don't they come with some measures about this to warn public?
See,
Sharif sir, give me 2 minutes.
No, I want to save time. You see, there has been complaint to SEBI, there has been complaint to RBI, etc. It's a long process that we can share with you today, even after this program is over, that, it takes time. It's altogether different ball. I will lose 5 questions if I allow one answer to you. Okay? Thank you very much. Yes. Please.
Assalamu alaikum. I have a question that, like we have the World Bank, we have the RBI, that is all covering the conventional banking. Like right now, World Islamic Economic Forum is one as a competitive for the Islamic finance. So there are many cooperative societies who are accruing the savings in the name of Islamic finance. And those deposits are again being deposited into the conventional banking, and many of the places I have seen that is not being utilized to empower the economic activity. It's only a lending process. Do we have any plans that will form a board or forum that will regularize on the government level, where we can have our own deposits, our own banking system and other things? Thank you.
That is the point we have been discussing for the whole day. Unfortunately, my friend, I have to stop it here because I have got clear indication that we are encroaching upon some other session. So I will leave this question to the panelists also, and to also other people to discuss and share their thoughts when we have break. I take the opportunity of thanking all the panelists also for bearing with me this tense session, because we had to make up for the over time that we had spent in other sessions. Thank you very much. Please give them a big hand to the contributions made by this. And I'm also grateful and thankful to you. Thank you very much for being little curt here today. Thank you. Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, can we have a big round of applause for the panel and the moderator especially, please? for allowing a very quick and robust Q&A. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, sir. Can you please stand for a group photo session before we move on to the valedictory function for today?